I went to this pretty interesting free seminar a couple of weeks ago. It was a health seminar. It was an alternative health seminar. And right when I walked in, it seemed that it was all themed around the ancient idea of Hippocratic, the guy who came up with the Hippocratic Oath. The guy who said, let medicine be your food and let food be your medicine. Meaning the idea is that if you eat healthy and eat the right foods, you won't need to go to the doctor. And this whole kind of seminar was based around the idea of healthy eating and staying away from pharmaceutical drugs. And they had kind of three basic things they were selling. There's a lot of people with booths that were selling things. They were either selling books, they were either selling supplements, or they were either selling these kind of juicing machines, juice type machines. But they also had a couple of lectures, and the lectures were all given by doctors, by MDs. And I always wonder when I see an MD pitching some kind of an alternative health idea. Part of me hopes that the MD is pitching the alternative health idea because after becoming an MD, they saw how horrific the world was from an MD's perspective, and they decided to try and teach people a better way, a less of a dark side of the force way to be healthy. The skeptical part of me always wonders that maybe they decided to become a doctor. They had this idea of what being a doctor would be like, and then they finally became a doctor and they thought that it absolutely sucked. Because there's a lot of articles in the news today about how being a doctor today really, really sucks because there's so much overhead and there's so much administrative bullcrap they got to put up with, and there's so much paperwork for all the extra insurance laws that they put on. And so I'm always wondering if maybe these doctors don't really care one way or the other about if people stay healthy or not. It's just that they've decided that maybe it's a lot easier and a lot more lucrative for them to write books about alternative health ideas. But some of these doctors gave some very, very interesting lectures, and some of them raised some very, very interesting and troubling points. One of the doctors started talking about how the pharmaceutical industry back in the 80s convinced the government to pass a law saying that it was okay for these drug companies to do drug tests and not report any negative results. I guess before the law passed, whenever they did a drug test, they were required by law to report both the positive and the negative results of any drug test. But once they got this law passed, they were no longer required to report the negative results of any drug test. And at first, this didn't really make them operate any differently. They still tried to find drugs that would solve problems, and they still did tests. They just realized they didn't have to report the negative side effects. But over time, they got more and more brave and bold with how widely they experimented. And today, according to this one doctor, because they don't have to report any negative side effects, that allows them to choose any drug they possibly can without even knowing what it's going to do. And it turns out that this is much cheaper for them from an experimental standpoint, because they just kind of create all these drugs at random without really having an idea of what they might do. And they just test these on these kind of guinea pig humans. Because if they kill the guinea pig humans, they don't have to tell anybody. And so their primary sorting criteria for finding participants in these drug trials is that the participants come from a very low income bracket, so that if they do die, if they do go crazy, if they are inadvertently turned into a serial killer or a rapist or a pedophile by these drugs, of which have no known outcome, they won't have the wherewithal, or their family won't have the wherewithal to sue the drug company or spend any time putting this story in the media. So the drug companies purposely choose their test subjects so they can kill them and nobody will know. And this allows them to just try any kind of random drug combination they can, and if they find one that works, they'll just sell that one. But a more troubling idea is one that one of the doctors brought up, and that is because there's such a pressure for pharmaceutical companies to become profitable, they've significantly lessened the product development cycle, which means from very first experiment to when they can start selling a drug is less than 2 years. And so even if you go to the doctor, and even if the doctor recommends you take a drug, and even if the doctor says it's been tested, it's been safe, what really that means is that this drug has only been tested for 2 years, which means the potential negative long-term side effects are unknown. So what this doctor was saying was that if you are going to take a drug prescribed by your doctor, make sure that drug has been on the market for at least 10 years. That's the only real way to know that there's no negative long-term side effects. And one way to kind of remember that is to only take generic prescription drugs, because drugs have to be on the market for at least 10 years before another company can make a generic copy of them. And so that's one way to make sure that the drug has been on the market for at least 10 years, which will ensure that all the kind of negative long-term side effects have kind of been tested out, which means that if you only take generic drugs, that's at least one step to make sure you're not going to be killed by these unexpected long-term negative side effects. But he kept recommending that the only way to really stay safe is to avoid the pharmaceutical medical industrial complex altogether, because he was saying that the medical pharmaceutical complex has become so huge and powerful, they essentially control the government. And once you kind of get sucked into the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex, they really don't care if you're healthy or not. They just want to use you as a kind of a placeholder to suck as much money through you from the insurance companies as they can. And the best way to stay healthy is to avoid doctors altogether. And that was kind of the theme of this whole kind of weekend free seminar, was that in order to avoid doctors altogether, in order to stay healthy, you just need to make sure to eat healthy food. And one thing they kept harping on was the idea that most illnesses are caused by the inflammation response, and the inflammation response comes from eating too much sugar and too many refined carbohydrates. And so if you just avoid carbohydrates, if you avoid sugar, you'll do a lot to decrease the inflammation response, which is responsible for nearly all ailments today. But essentially they were saying that if you want to stay healthy, you really need to avoid the doctor, which is kind of the opposite of what they want us to believe, because not only do the medical, pharmaceutical, industrial complex control the entire government, they also control the entire media. So if you watch TV commercials, you'll see that every other commercial is for some kind of a new pharmaceutical drug. But in reality, if you want to stay healthy, the secret is very simple. Just eat healthy food. Message from Hippocratic was all over the place. The one that said, "Let food be your medicine, and let medicine be your food."